The muddy water crashed against Zara's chest like a wild beast trying to drag her under. Her bare feet slipped on the slick rocks beneath the surface as she fought to keep her balance. The rain poured down so hard she could barely see 3 feet ahead, but she could hear him, the desperate gasping and splashing of someone drowning just beyond her reach. "Hold on," she shouted over the roar of the flash flood, though she wondered if her voice could carry through the storm. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she took another dangerous step deeper into the rushing water. One wrong move and she would be swept away too, leaving her younger brother Toby alone in this world. But she couldn't just stand there and watch someone die. The stranger's head bobbed up again, his arms flailing wildly as the current pulled him downstream toward the old bridge. If he hit those concrete supports, he would be dead for sure. Zara pushed forward, the freezing water now up to her shoulders. Her simple cotton dress clung to her dark skin, weighing her down like an anchor. This was exactly the kind of storm that had killed her parents 5 years ago. They had tried to cross the swollen creek to reach the main road, and the water had claimed them both. Now here she was, risking the same fate for a complete stranger. But what choice did she have? She had always been taught that a life was a life, no matter who it belonged to. The man went under again. Zara's stomach dropped. She dove forward, her hands searching blindly through the murky water until her fingers caught something, fabric, then an arm. She pulled with every ounce of strength in her small frame, fighting against the current that wanted to tear him away from her. His head broke the surface and he gasped, coughing up muddy water. His eyes were wide with panic, unfocused and desperate. Up close, she could see he was young, maybe around her age of 25, with dark hair plastered to his forehead. But there was no time to study his features. The water was rising faster now, and they both needed to get to safety. "Can you swim?" she yelled. He tried to answer but only coughed up more water. His movements were weak and uncoordinated. Whatever had happened to him before he ended up in the flood, he was in no shape to save himself. Zara wrapped her arm around his chest and began the exhausting journey back to shore. Every step was a battle. The man was dead weight, his body limp against hers as she half carried, half dragged him through the churning water. Her legs burned with the effort, and more than once she stumbled, nearly losing them both to the hungry current. The village of Millbrook had seen its share of storms, but nothing like this. The creek that usually babbled peacefully behind the houses had turned into a monster, swallowing up everything in its path. Old Mrs. Patterson's chicken coop was already gone, along with the wooden footbridge that connected the two sides of the village. Zara could hear people shouting in the distance, probably trying to save what they could of their belongings. She focused on the muddy bank ahead, willing herself to keep moving. Her lungs burned and her arms ached, but she refused to let go of the stranger. Step by step, she pulled him toward safety, driven by a stubbornness that had kept her going through 5 years of poverty and hardship. When her feet finally touched solid ground, Zara nearly collapsed with relief. She dragged the unconscious man up onto the grass, both of them covered in mud and debris. He wasn't breathing right. His chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged gasps. She rolled him onto his side and pounded on his back until he coughed up what seemed like half the creek. "Come on," she whispered, pushing wet hair out of his face. "Don't you dare die on me now." His eyelids fluttered open for just a moment, revealing eyes the color of storm clouds. Then they closed again and his body went limp. But he was breathing steadily now, which was something. Zara sat back on her heels, shivering in the cold rain. Her modest 2-room cottage was only 50 yards away, but getting an unconscious man there would be another challenge entirely. She was small and slight, built more for endurance than strength. Still, she had no choice. She couldn't leave him here in the storm. As she struggled to lift him, she noticed things that seemed out of place. His clothes were expensive, the kind of fabric that probably cost more than she made in a month working odd jobs around the village. His hands were soft, without the calluses that marked a working man. And on his wrist was a watch that caught the dim light even through the rain. It looked like real gold. But none of that mattered now. Rich or poor, he was just another human being who needed help. It took her 20 minutes to drag him to her cottage, stopping every few feet to rest and readjust her grip. By the time she got him inside, her back was screaming and her arms felt like rubber. She managed to get him onto her small couch, then collapsed into the wooden chair beside it, breathing hard. The cottage was simple but clean. One room served as kitchen and living area with a small bedroom off to the side. Everything Zara owned could probably fit in a single trunk, but it was home. She had fought to keep it after her parents died, working any job she could find to pay the small rent to the landowner. Thunder crashed outside, rattling the windows. The storm was getting worse if that was possible. Zara forced herself to get up and check on her patient. His breathing was stronger now and some color had returned to his face. She found an old blanket and covered him, then went to heat some water on her tiny wood stove. As she waited for the water to warm, she studied the stranger's face in the lamplight. He was handsome in a way that made her heart skip a little, with strong features and dark stubble along his jaw. But there was something else about him, a certain refinement that spoke of a life very different from hers. Who was he? How had he ended up in the flood? And what was she going to do with him now? Outside, the storm raged on as if trying to wash away the whole world. But inside her small cottage, Zara had saved one life. For now that felt like enough. The stranger slept for 18 hours straight. Zara checked on him every few hours, worried that he might slip away without warning. She had seen enough death in her young life to know how quickly things could change. But each time she pressed her ear to his chest, his heartbeat was strong and steady. When he finally woke up, it was to the smell of her grandmother's vegetable soup simmering on the stove. Zara was mending a torn dress by the window when she heard him stir. She looked over to find him trying to sit up, his face confused and slightly panicked. "Easy," she said, setting down her sewing. "You're safe now." He looked around the small room, taking in the simple furniture and faded wallpaper. When his eyes met hers, she saw intelligence there but also something guarded. "Where am I?" His voice was rough from nearly drowning, but she could hear refinement in his accent. This was not a man from their little village. "Millbrook," she said. "You were caught in the flash flood yesterday. Do you remember what happened?" He pressed his fingers to his temples, wincing. No. I don't remember anything. Not how I got there, not where I was going." He looked at her with those storm-gray eyes. "Did you save me?" Zara felt heat rise in her cheeks. Anyone would have done the same thing. "I don't think that's true." He studied her face with an intensity that made her nervous. "What's your name?" "Zara. Zara Johnson." She folded her hands in her lap. "What should I call you?" He was quiet for a long moment, and she had the strange feeling he was making some kind of decision. "I don't know," he said finally. "I can't remember my name." Something about the way he said it made her wonder if he was telling the complete truth. But amnesia wasn't uncommon after a head injury, and he had certainly been through trauma. "Well, I have to call you something," she said. "How about Alex? You look like an Alex." A small smile crossed his face. "Alex it is then." Over the next few days, as Alex recovered his strength, Zara found herself drawn into conversations that surprised her. He was educated, that much was clear from the way he spoke about books and ideas. But he also seemed genuinely interested in her simple life, asking questions about the village and how things worked there. "You live here alone?" he asked on the third morning, watching her prepare breakfast with ingredients that were clearly stretched thin. "My brother Toby lives here too, but he's staying with our neighbor Mrs. Chen while you recover. I didn't want to crowd you." She didn't mention that she also hadn't wanted to explain to her 14-year-old brother why she had brought home a strange man. That was thoughtful. Alex accepted the bowl of oatmeal she offered, though she noticed he barely touched it. Was he used to better food? "What happened to your parents?" The question was gentle, but it still hit a tender spot. "Flash flood 5 years ago. Same kind of storm that nearly got you." She kept her voice steady, though talking about it still hurt. "They were trying to reach town for medicine. I was sick with fever, and they thought I might die if they didn't get help." "I'm sorry," Alex said, and she could hear real sympathy in his voice. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "We managed." She sat down across from him with her own small portion. "Toby and I, we take care of each other." She noticed Alex looking around the cottage again, his eyes taking in the patched walls and second-hand furniture. But there was no judgment in his expression, only curiosity. "How do you make a living here?" he asked. "Whatever I can find. I help Mrs. Patterson with her garden, do mending for people in town, sometimes help at the general store during busy seasons." She shrugged. "It's not much, but it keeps us fed." That afternoon, while Zara was outside hanging laundry, she heard voices from the direction of the village center. Mrs. Chen was walking up the path with 2 other women, their faces bright with curiosity. "Zara dear," Mrs. Chen called out, "we came to check on your patient. The whole village is talking about your rescue." Zara tried not to sigh. In a place as small as Millbrook, any unusual event became the topic of conversation for weeks. "He's recovering well," she said diplomatically. "Is it true he can't remember anything?" asked Sarah Miller, the baker's wife. "Not even his own name?" "Head injuries can do that," Zara replied, though she was starting to have her own doubts about Alex's memory loss. Has anyone come looking for him? Mrs. Chin pressed. A man like that must have family somewhere. A man like that. Even the village women had noticed there was something different about Alex. His speech, his manners, the way he carried himself even when weak, it all pointed to a background very different from theirs. No one's come looking, Zara said. After the women left, she found Alex sitting by the window, staring out at the road that led away from the village. There was something melancholy in his expression that tugged at her heart. Homesick? She asked. He turned to her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Hard to be homesick when you can't remember home. But Zara was beginning to suspect that wasn't entirely true. Sometimes she caught him looking at things with too much understanding, as if he remembered more than he let on. And there were little things. The way he automatically reached for silverware that should be on the right side of the plate, or how he seemed surprised by the simplicity of her meals. That evening, as she prepared their simple dinner, she decided to test her theory. I was thinking, she said casually, maybe tomorrow we could walk into town. Someone there might recognize you. She watched his face carefully and saw something flicker across it. Not confusion, but what looked almost like fear. I don't think that's necessary, he said quickly. I mean, if someone was looking for me, they would have found me by now, right? Maybe, Zara said. But she was more convinced than ever that Alex was hiding something. The question was what and why. That night, unable to sleep, she crept out to the living room to check on him. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating his face as he slept. Even in rest, there was something aristocratic about his features. This was not a man who had ever known real hardship. As she turned to go back to her room, something caught her eye. His watch, which he had placed on the small table beside the couch, gleamed in the dim light. She moved closer and nearly gasped at what she saw. The watch was definitely real gold, with tiny diamonds marking the hours. In the center of the face, she could just make out elegant script that looked like a brand name, though she couldn't read it in the darkness. But she didn't need to read it to know that this single piece of jewelry was worth more than everything she owned combined. Who was Alex really? And what was he running from? Alex had been staying with Zara for a week when he first noticed the empty pantry. She thought she was being subtle about it, but he had years of business training in reading between the lines. The portions at meals had gotten smaller. She made excuses about not being hungry. And yesterday, he had caught her watering down the soup to make it stretch further. She was feeding him from her own meager supplies, and it was clear she couldn't afford it. The realization hit him harder than it should have. In his other life, the life he was trying so hard to forget, people constantly wanted things from him. Money, favors, connections, opportunities. But Zara asked for nothing. She had risked her life to save a complete stranger, then opened her home to him without expecting anything in return. It made him feel ashamed of the lies he was telling her. Zara, he said that morning as she prepared another thin breakfast, I should start helping out around here. I'm feeling much stronger. She looked up from the stove, surprise flickering across her face. You're still recovering. You don't need to. I want to. He stood up, testing his strength. The dizziness that had plagued him for the first few days was gone, and his body felt almost back to normal. What needs doing? She studied his face as if trying to figure out if he was serious. Well, the garden could use some work. The flood damaged a lot of my vegetables, and I need to replant if I'm going to have anything to harvest this fall. Perfect. Alexander Sterling might not know much about manual labor, but he knew plenty about systems and efficiency. And if his memory served him right, he had invested in several agricultural technology companies over the years. Surely some of that knowledge would be useful here. The garden behind Zara's cottage was about the size of a large room, with neat rows that had clearly been planned with care. But the recent flood had washed away seedlings and left others waterlogged and dying. What were you growing? Alex asked, surveying the damage. Tomatoes, beans, squash, carrots. Zara pointed to different sections. Some herbs over there. It's enough to feed us most of the year if I can preserve some for winter. Alex walked the perimeter of the garden, his mind already working. The drainage is the main problem, he said, more to himself than to her. All this water has nowhere to go, so it just sits here and drowns the roots. I know that, Zara said with a slight edge to her voice. But I can't exactly install a proper drainage system. Do you know how much that would cost? He did know actually. But Alex, the amnesia patient, wouldn't. What if we did it with what's available here? Raised beds, maybe some channels to direct the water away from the plants. Zara raised an eyebrow. You know about farming? It seems familiar, he said carefully. Maybe I worked with my hands before, whatever happened to me. It was another lie, but a necessary one. He couldn't exactly tell her that he was remembering business presentations about sustainable agriculture and water management systems. They spent the morning working together, and Alex found himself genuinely enjoying the physical labor. His soft businessman's hands quickly developed blisters, but there was something satisfying about creating something tangible instead of shuffling numbers on a computer screen. "Hand me that rake," Zara said, and when he passed it to her, their fingers brushed. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through him. She must have felt it too because she pulled her hand back quickly, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Sorry," she murmured. "Don't be." The words came out softer than he intended, and for a moment they just looked at each other. He was struck again by how beautiful she was, not in the polished way of the women in his usual social circle, but with a natural grace that took his breath away. By afternoon, they had created a basic drainage system using rocks and logs to channel excess water away from the growing areas. It wasn't perfect, but it would work. "This is amazing," Zara said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "How did you know to do this?" "Lucky guess," Alex offered, but he could see she wasn't entirely convinced. That evening, as they sat on her small porch watching the sunset, Zara brought up something that had clearly been bothering her. "Alex," she said hesitantly, "I need to ask you about something." His stomach tightened. Had she figured out who he was? "What is it?" "That watch of yours." She gestured toward his wrist. "It looks expensive." Alex glanced down at the Patek Philippe that had cost him more than most people made in a year. He had been careless, not thinking about how out of place it would look here. "I don't know," he said. "I was wearing it when you found me. Could be fake for all I know." "Maybe." But her tone suggested she didn't believe that any more than he did. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the village settling down for the night. It was peaceful in a way that Alexander's old life had never been. No urgent phone calls, no crises that needed immediate attention, no board meetings or merger negotiations. Just the simple rhythm of daily life. "Zara," he said suddenly, "why did you save me?" She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and thoughtful. "My grandmother used to say that we're all connected like threads in a tapestry. When one thread breaks, it weakens the whole fabric. So we have to take care of each other, even when it's hard." She looked at him with those warm brown eyes. "Besides, what if it had been me in that water? Wouldn't you have tried to save me?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I would have." And he meant it. Somewhere over the past week, this woman had gotten under his skin in a way no one ever had. Her kindness, her strength, the way she carried herself with dignity despite having so little, it all fascinated him. But what fascinated him most was how she made him feel. For the first time in years, he felt useful for something other than making money. She didn't care about his business empire or his bank account. She didn't even know they existed. She just cared about him as a person. It was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. "I should let you get some rest," he said, standing up from the wooden step. "Alex." She caught his hand as he turned to go inside. "Thank you for helping with the garden today. It means a lot." Her hand was small and calloused from hard work, but it fit perfectly in his. He found himself wanting to bring it to his lips, to tell her everything and promise her the world. Instead, he just squeezed gently and said, "Thank you for everything you've done for me." As he settled onto the couch that had become his bed, Alex stared up at the ceiling and tried to figure out what he was going to do. His business partner would be looking for him by now. There were deals pending that needed his attention, decisions that only he could make. His entire life was waiting for him back in the city. But for the first time in his adult life, Alexander Sterling wasn't sure he wanted to go back to it. 2 weeks had passed since the flood, and Millbrook was slowly getting back to normal. The creek had returned to its usual gentle babble, and people were starting to repair the damage to their homes and gardens. But for Zara, nothing felt normal anymore. Having Alex in her life had changed everything in ways she was only beginning to understand. He had thrown himself into helping the village recover with an energy that surprised everyone. Every morning he would ask who needed assistance, then spend his day fixing roofs, clearing debris, or helping with whatever task required an extra pair of hands. The villagers had started calling him Zara's Alex, which made her heart flutter in a way she tried to ignore. "He's quite something, your young man," Mrs. Chin said one afternoon as they watched Alex help old Mr. Rodriguez repair his damaged fence. "Very hard-working for someone who can't remember where he comes from." "He's not my young man," Zara protested, but even she could hear how weak the denial sounded. Mrs. Chin gave her a knowing look. "Child, I've been watching people fall in love for 70 years. I know what it looks like. Well, the word made Zara's stomach flip. She couldn't be falling in love with Alex. He was clearly from a different world, and eventually his memory would return and he would leave. She would be foolish to let her heart get involved. But her heart seemed to have ideas of its own. That evening, as they worked together in the garden that was now thriving thanks to Alex's improvements, she found herself stealing glances at him. His expensive clothes had been replaced with simple work shirts and jeans that Mrs. Patterson had found for him, but somehow he still carried himself with an elegance that made her pulse quicken. The tomatoes are coming along nicely, he said, checking the small green fruits that had appeared on the vines. Thanks to your drainage system. She brushed dirt off her hands and stood up. I should have enough to sell at the farmer's market next month. You sell at the market? Alex looked interested. How does that work? Zara explained the small weekly market in the town square, where local farmers and crafters sold their goods to people from surrounding areas. It wasn't much, but the extra income helped get her through the leaner months. What if we expanded? Alex said thoughtfully. Grew more variety, maybe some herbs that bring higher prices? With what money? Zara laughed, but not unkindly. Seeds cost money. Fertilizer costs money. I can barely afford what I'm growing now. Alex was quiet for a moment, and she could almost see the wheels turning in his head. What if I told you I had some ideas about how to do it cheaply? Using things we can find or make ourselves. I'd say you seem to know an awful lot about business for someone with amnesia. The comment was gentle, but Alex's face went carefully blank in a way that was becoming familiar. Whenever she touched on subjects that might reveal his past, he got that same guarded expression. Maybe it's instinct, he said finally. That night, as they sat on the porch sharing a simple dinner, Zara decided to be direct. Alex, who are you really? He nearly choked on his water. What do you mean? You know things. About farming, about business, about how things work. You speak like someone who's educated. Your hands were soft when I found you, like you'd never done manual labor. She set down her fork and looked at him steadily. I won't judge you whatever your story is. But I wish you'd trust me enough to tell me the truth. For a long moment, Alex was silent. She could see him struggling with something, weighing options in his mind. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with regret. I want to tell you, he said quietly. More than you know. But I'm afraid if I do, it will change everything between us. Keeping secrets is already changing things between us. He looked at her then with such longing that her breath caught. What if I told you that my life before this was nothing like the life I have here? What if I told you that being with you these past weeks has been the happiest I've ever been? The words hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and fear. Zara's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. Then I'd say that what matters isn't who you were before, but who you choose to be now. Alex reached across the small space between their chairs and took her hand. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, sending warmth shooting up her arm. Zara, he said softly, Zara. Alex. A young voice interrupted them. Toby came running up the path, his face bright with excitement. Mrs. Patterson's cow got loose again, and she stuck in the mud down by the creek. The moment broken, Alex dropped her hand and they both stood up. We better go help, Zara said, though part of her wanted to send Toby away and find out what Alex had been about to say. The rescue of Mrs. Patterson's cow turned into a village-wide effort, with half of Millbrook gathered around the muddy creek bank trying to figure out how to extract a very stubborn Holstein from the muck. Alex took charge naturally, organizing the men with ropes while directing the women to bring blankets and warm water. Alex, called Tom Miller, the baker. How do you know so much about organizing people? Lucky guess, Alex replied, but Zara caught the quick look of panic that crossed his face. It took 2 hours, but they finally got Bessie out of the mud and back to her pasture. As the crowd dispersed, Mrs. Patterson insisted on giving Alex a jar of her famous apple butter as thanks. You're a natural leader, she told him. Ever think about running for village council? Alex laughed, but it sounded forced. I don't think I'm planning to stay that long. The words hit Zara like a punch to the stomach. Of course he wasn't planning to stay. She had known that from the beginning. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that hurt more than she expected. Later, as they walked home in the darkness, they were both quiet. The easy companionship of earlier had been replaced by an awkward tension. About what I said before, Alex began as they reached her cottage. You don't have to explain, Zara said quickly. I understand. You have a life somewhere else. Eventually you'll remember it or someone will come looking for you and you'll go back to it. Zara? It's okay. She forced a smile. We both knew this was temporary. But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Zara admitted to herself that temporary or not, she was already in too deep. She was falling in love with a man she barely knew, who would inevitably leave her behind. In the next room, Alex lay awake too, staring at his expensive watch in the moonlight. He thought about the phone call he could make, the helicopter that could be here in hours to take him back to his real life. He thought about the board meeting he was supposed to attend next week, the merger that was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Then he thought about Zara's laugh, the way she looked when she was working in the garden, the feel of her small hand in his. He thought about Mrs. Patterson's apple butter and Toby's excited chatter and the simple satisfaction of helping his neighbors. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander Sterling was faced with a choice between what he was supposed to want and what he actually wanted. And he wasn't sure which one would win. The annual Millbrook Harvest Fair had been a tradition for over 50 years, and this year it felt more important than ever. After the devastating flood, the community needed something to celebrate, a reason to come together and remember the good things in life. Zara had been looking forward to the fair for weeks, but as the day approached, she found herself increasingly nervous. It would be Alex's first public event in the village, and she wasn't sure how he would handle being the center of attention. People were curious about the mysterious stranger, and their questions were becoming harder to deflect. "You sure about this?" she asked him on the morning of the fair as they loaded her preserves and vegetables into the small cart she used for market days. "Are you kidding?" Alex grinned at her, looking genuinely excited. "I've been helping plan this thing for weeks. I want to see how it all comes together." That was another thing that had started to worry her. Alex had thrown himself into organizing the fair with an efficiency that impressed even the village council. He had suggested layouts for the booths, coordinated schedules, and somehow convinced local businesses to donate more prizes than they ever had before. It was the kind of large-scale organizing that spoke of serious experience, yet he still maintained he remembered nothing about his past. The village square had been transformed overnight. Colorful banners stretched between the lampposts and wooden booths lined the streets. The smell of kettle corn and barbecue filled the air, mixed with the scent of late summer flowers from the garden competition displays. "Zara, Alex." Mrs. Chin waved them over to her booth, which featured intricate quilts she had made over the past year. "Come see how many people showed up." The fair was indeed busier than usual. Families had come from neighboring towns, drawn by word of mouth about Millbrook's recovery after the flood. Children ran between the booths with sticky fingers and bright smiles, while adults browsed the various offerings and caught up with friends. "This is wonderful," Alex said, his eyes taking in the scene with what looked like genuine pleasure. "Everyone seems so happy." "It's been a hard few months," Zara explained as they set up her booth. "People needed this. Something to remind them that life isn't just about surviving disasters." Alex helped her arrange the jars of preserves and bundles of fresh vegetables, his movements careful and precise. She noticed he had a natural eye for display, arranging things in a way that was both attractive and practical. "You're good at this," she commented. "Am I?" He looked pleased by the compliment. "It feels right somehow." As the morning progressed, Zara's booth did better business than she had ever experienced. People kept stopping to talk to Alex, drawn by his easy charm and genuine interest in their stories. He remembered everyone's names after hearing them once, asked thoughtful questions about their families and businesses, and somehow made each person feel like the most important conversation of his day. "That man of yours is quite the charmer," said Eleanor Wright, the town librarian, as she purchased a jar of Zara's blackberry jam. "Where did you say he was from again?" "I didn't," Zara replied diplomatically, but she could see the speculation in Eleanor's eyes. By afternoon the fair was in full swing. The local band had set up on a small stage, playing folk songs that had people tapping their feet and swaying to the music. Children lined up for pony rides while their parents sampled homemade cider and competed in various contests. "Come on," Alex said, appearing at Zara's elbow with 2 cups of fresh lemonade. "Sarah Miller can watch your booth for a while. You should enjoy the fair too." "I can't just leave." "Yes, you can." Sarah appeared with a friendly smile. "Business has been slow at the bakery booth anyway. Go have some fun." Before Zara could protest further, Alex had taken her hand and was leading her into the crowd. His fingers intertwined with hers felt natural and right, as if they had been holding hands for years instead of weeks. They wandered through the fair together, stopping to watch the pie-eating contest, won by 12-year-old Jimmy Patterson, and the watermelon seed spitting competition, dominated by the teenage boys. Alex tried his hand at the ring toss and surprised everyone by winning a large stuffed bear. which he immediately presented to a little girl whose balloon had floated away. "My hero," the child's mother laughed, but Zara noticed the way several women looked at Alex with obvious appreciation. He was handsome, charming, and clearly well off despite his simple clothes. In a small town like Millbrook, eligible bachelors were rare. The thought made her stomach twist with an emotion she didn't want to name. As evening approached, the band switched to slower songs and couples began to dance on the small area that had been cleared in front of the stage. Zara watched wistfully, remembering the last time she had danced. It had been at her high school graduation a lifetime ago. "Dance with me," Alex said softly. She looked up at him in surprise. "I don't really know how." "Neither do I, apparently." His smile was self-deprecating. "But I figure we can learn together." He held out his hand and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. He led her to the edge of the dancing area, away from the other couples but still close enough to hear the music clearly. The song was a gentle ballad about finding love in unexpected places, and as Alex pulled her into his arms, Zara felt her heart skip. He held her carefully as if she were made of something precious and fragile. One hand rested lightly on her waist while the other held her fingers gently. They moved slowly, barely more than swaying in time with the music. Zara was acutely aware of everything about him. The warmth of his hand through her dress, the clean scent of his skin, the way he looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. "This is nice," she whispered. "Better than nice," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. The song ended but they didn't move apart. Around them, other couples continued to dance to the next tune, but Zara felt like she and Alex were in their own private bubble, separate from everything else. "Zara," Alex said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you." Her heart started beating faster. "What is it?" He opened his mouth to speak, then seemed to change his mind. Instead, he lifted his free hand to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "Inside and out. I want you to know that." Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, barely a brush of lips, but it set off fireworks in Zara's chest. She had been kissed before but never like this, never with such tenderness and promise. When they broke apart, she felt dizzy. "Alex," she breathed. "I know," he said, resting his forehead against hers. "I know this is complicated. But I can't pretend any more that what I feel for you is just gratitude." "What do you feel for me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He was quiet for a long moment and she could see him struggling with something. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible over the music. "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hit her like a physical blow. She had hoped, dreamed even, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. "Alex. I know it's crazy," he continued, the words tumbling out as if a dam had burst. "I know you deserve better than someone who can't even tell you his real name. But I can't help how I feel." His real name. The reminder of all the secrets between them was like cold water on the warm feelings flooding through her. "Who are you really?" she asked again, more urgently this time. Pain flashed across his face. "Someone who doesn't deserve you," he said quietly. "But someone who loves you anyway." Before she could push for a real answer, Toby came running up to them, his face flushed with excitement. "Zara, Alex, come quick. They're about to announce the winners of the garden competition, and Mrs. Patterson thinks you might have a chance." The moment broken, they followed Toby back toward the main stage. But as they walked, Alex's hand still in hers, Zara's mind was spinning. He loved her. He had actually said the words. But he was still hiding something important, something that made him believe he didn't deserve her. The garden competition results were announced. Zara came in second, which was better than she had ever done, followed by the traditional closing ceremony where the whole community joined hands and sang the old folk song that had ended the fair for decades. As Zara stood there, surrounded by her neighbors and friends, Alex's hand warm in hers, she felt a bittersweet mixture of joy and sadness. This was what happiness felt like, being part of something bigger than yourself, being loved and loving in return. But she also felt the shadow of uncertainty hanging over it all. How long could this last? How long before Alex's past caught up with them and shattered this perfect moment? Later, as they walked home under a canopy of stars, the sounds of the fair fading behind them, Alex stopped suddenly in the middle of the path. "Zara," he said, turning to face her. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that these past few weeks have been the best of my life. You saved me in more ways than just pulling me from that flood." "Alex, you're scaring me. What's going to happen?" He pulled her close, holding her tight against his chest. She could hear his heart beating fast and unsteady. "I don't know," he whispered into her hair. "But I'm going to fight for this. For us. I promise you that." As they stood there in the darkness, holding each other close, neither of them saw the expensive black car that had been parked at the edge of town all day, or the man in the business suit who had been watching the fair with binoculars. Alexander Sterling's old life had finally found him. The knock on the door came at 7 in the morning, sharp and insistent. Zara was in the kitchen making coffee when she heard it, and something about the sound made her stomach clench with dread. People in Millbrook didn't knock like that, urgent and demanding. It sounded official. Alex emerged from the bathroom, his face still damp from washing. He had been staying in Toby's room since her brother returned from Mrs. Chen's, sleeping on a small cot they had borrowed. The arrangement was proper but torturous, having him so close yet maintaining the careful distance that small-town propriety demanded. "Are you expecting someone?" he asked, but she could see tension in his shoulders. "No." Zara wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer the door, Alex close behind her. The man standing on her porch looked completely out of place in Millbrook. He wore an expensive gray suit despite the early hour, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and when he smiled, it was the practiced expression of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Good morning," he said smoothly. "I'm looking for Alexander Sterling. I believe he may be staying here." Zara felt Alex go rigid behind her. She glanced back and saw his face had gone pale, his eyes wide with what looked like panic. "I'm sorry," she managed to say, "but I don't know anyone by that name." The man's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I think you do. Medium height, dark hair, gray eyes?" He would have been injured, possibly claiming memory loss. "I don't." "It's all right, Zara." Alex's voice was quiet and defeated. He stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Hello, Marcus." "Alexander." The man, Marcus, looked genuinely relieved. "Thank God. Do you have any idea how worried we've all been? When your helicopter went down in that storm and we couldn't find you, we thought." He shook his head. "We've had search teams combing the area for weeks." Helicopter. Zara's mind reeled. Alex had been in a helicopter crash? "How did you find me?" Alex asked. "Social media, believe it or not. Someone posted pictures from your little village fair last night, and facial recognition software did the rest." Marcus glanced at Zara with polite but dismissive interest. "We need to get you back to the city immediately. The board meeting is tomorrow, and the Harrison merger can't proceed without your signature." "Marcus, Alexander, we don't have time for this. The car is waiting and the jet is fueled and ready." Marcus checked his expensive watch. "If we leave now, we can still salvage the deal. Give me a minute." Alex's voice was strained. "Let me get my things." Marcus nodded and stepped back, but Zara could see him checking his phone impatiently. This was a man used to having his orders followed without question. Alex turned to her, his face full of anguish. "Zara, I can explain." "Alexander Sterling." The name felt foreign on her tongue. "That's your real name?" "Yes." "And you remember everything?" "You've remembered everything all along." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were full of pain. "Yes." The simple admission hit her harder than she had expected. All those weeks of caring for him, worrying about his lost memories, creating a life together, and it had all been built on lies. "I see." She was proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Well then, you should go get your things." "Zara, please let me explain." "There's nothing to explain." She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "You lied to me. For weeks you lied to me. I wanted to tell you. But you didn't." She looked at him steadily, memorizing his face. "Go get your things, Alexander." The use of his real name made him flinch as if she had slapped him. He opened his mouth to say something else, then seemed to think better of it. With one last anguished look, he went inside to pack. Marcus cleared his throat delicately. "I hope you understand, Miss Johnson." "Zara Johnson." "Miss Johnson. Alexander is a very important man. He has responsibilities, obligations. This little vacation has already cost his company millions of dollars." Vacation. As if the past few weeks had been some kind of game to Alex. As if what they had shared meant nothing. "Of course," she said quietly. Alex emerged a few minutes later with a small bag containing the few things he had acquired during his stay. He had left behind the work clothes, she noticed, and was wearing the expensive shirt and pants he had been found in, now cleaned and pressed. Already he looked different. More polished, more distant. more like the stranger she now realized he had always been. "Zara," he said desperately, "this isn't how I wanted you to find out." "How did you want me to find out?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "Were you planning to tell me at all, or were you just going to disappear one day?" "I was going to tell you. Last night at the fair I tried." "You tried to tell me you loved me," she interrupted. "But you couldn't even tell me your real name." Marcus was checking his watch again, clearly impatient with the emotional scene playing out on her front porch. "Alexander, we really need to go." "Just give me one more minute," Alex snapped, showing more authority than she had ever heard from him. Marcus stepped back, surprised. Alex moved closer to Zara, his voice low and urgent. "I know you're hurt. I know you feel betrayed. And you have every right to. But what I told you last night was true. I do love you." "How can I believe anything you say?" The words came out as barely a whisper. "I don't even know who you really are." "You know me better than anyone else in the world," he said fiercely. "These past weeks this is who I really am. Not Alexander Sterling the businessman, but just Alex. The man who loves working in your garden and helping your neighbors and falling asleep to the sound of your voice in the next room." Despite everything, his words made her heart ache. Because she had fallen in love with that man too, the gentle, kind person who had fit so seamlessly into her simple life. "But that's not your real life, is it?" she said. "Your real life is helicopters and board meetings and million-dollar mergers." He opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again. They both knew she was right. "Alexander." Marcus's voice held a warning edge. "Now." Alex looked back at his business partner, then at Zara. For a moment she thought he might stay. Might choose her over whatever was waiting for him in the city. Instead he reached into his pocket and pulled out his expensive watch. "I want you to have this," he said, pressing it into her hands. "I can't take this." She tried to give it back, but he stepped away. "Please. It's worth enough to keep you and Toby comfortable for years. Consider it payment for everything you did for me." Payment? The word made her feel sick. As if caring for him, loving him, had been some kind of business transaction. "I don't want your money," she said, holding the watch out to him. "Then think of it as a promise," he said softly. "That I'll find a way to come back to you." Before she could respond, Marcus had taken Alex's arm and was guiding him toward the sleek black car parked at the end of her driveway. Alex looked back once, his face etched with regret and longing. Then the car door closed and he was gone. Zara stood on her porch for a long time after the car disappeared, the expensive watch heavy in her hands. Around her, Millbrook was waking up, Mrs. Patterson letting her chickens out, Tom Miller opening the bakery, children getting ready for school. Life going on as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The man she had fallen in love with didn't exist. Alex had been a role Alexander Sterling was playing, and now the performance was over. She looked down at the watch in her hands, white gold and diamonds that probably cost more than her cottage was worth. A promise, he had called it. But promises were only as good as the people who made them. And she was beginning to realize she had never really known Alexander Sterling at all. For 3 days after Alex left, Zara tried to pretend everything was normal. She tended her garden, helped Mrs. Patterson with her chickens, and went about her daily routine as if her heart hadn't been ripped out and taken away in an expensive car. But Toby knew something was wrong. "Where did Alex go?" he asked for the 4th time over breakfast on Thursday morning. "I told you he remembered who he was and went back to his real life," Zara said, keeping her eyes on her oatmeal. "But he said he would teach me how to fix the roof before winter. You can learn from Tom Miller. He's good with repairs." Toby was quiet for a moment, studying her face with the perception that often surprised her in her teenage brother. "You miss him?" It wasn't a question, so she didn't answer. Instead, she stood up and began clearing the dishes, trying to ignore the ache in her chest that seemed to grow stronger each day instead of better. That afternoon, she was weeding the garden when Mrs. Chen appeared with a folded newspaper in her hands and a concerned expression on her face. "Zara dear," she said hesitantly, "I think you need to see this." The newspaper was from the city, 3 hours away, not something anyone in Millbrook usually bothered with. But there on the front page of the business section was a photograph that made Zara's blood run cold. It was Alex. But not the Alex she had known. This version wore a perfectly tailored suit and carried himself with the confident authority of a man accustomed to power. The headline read, "Sterling Industries CEO returns after mysterious disappearance." With trembling hands, Zara unfolded the paper and read the article. Alexander Sterling, CEO and primary shareholder of Sterling Industries, returned to corporate headquarters yesterday after a weeks-long absence that had sent shockwaves through the business community. Sterling, whose company is worth an estimated $4.2 billion, had been missing since his private helicopter went down during a severe storm 3 weeks ago. "We're relieved to have Alexander back," said Marcus Webb, Sterling's business partner and COO. His leadership was crucial for finalizing several major acquisitions that were put on hold during his absence. Sterling Industries, founded by Alexander's grandfather in 1952, is one of the country's largest private investment firms, with holdings in technology, real estate, and renewable energy. At 28, Alexander Sterling is considered one of the youngest and most successful entrepreneurs of his generation. When asked about his absence, Sterling declined to comment, saying only that he was grateful to be alive and looked forward to getting back to business. $4.2 billion. Zara had to read the number 3 times before it sank in. Alexander, wasn't just wealthy. He was one of the richest men in the country. And he had been living in her tiny cottage, eating her simple meals, sleeping on her borrowed cot, all while lying about who he was. "Oh, honey," Mrs. Chin said softly, seeing the expression on Zara's face. "I'm so sorry." Zara couldn't speak. The watch Alex had given her was sitting on her kitchen table, and now she understood why he had been so insistent she keep it. To him, it probably seemed like pocket change. A tip for the poor village girl who had been foolish enough to fall in love with him. "There's more," Mrs. Chin said reluctantly. She turned to the society page where a smaller headline caught Zara's eye: "Sterling heir spotted with socialite at charity gala." The accompanying photo showed Alexander in a tuxedo, his arm around a stunning blonde woman in an evening gown that probably cost more than Zara made in a year. They were both smiling at the camera, looking perfectly matched and completely at ease in their glittering world. The caption identified the woman as Victoria Ashford, daughter of real estate mogul Richard Ashford and longtime friend of the Sterling family. Longtime friend. The phrase hit Zara like a physical blow. Here was Alexander's real world, charity galas and socialites and women who belonged in his stratosphere. What had she been thinking? That a billionaire would give up his empire for a poor village girl? "When was this picture taken?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Mrs. Chin checked the date on the newspaper. 2 days ago. 2 days. Alexander had been back in his old life for less than a week, and he was already at social events with beautiful women. So much for his promises about finding a way back to her. "I should get back inside," Zara said, folding the newspaper carefully. "Thank you for showing me this." "Zara? I'm fine," she lied. "Really?" But she wasn't fine. She felt humiliated and naive and angry at herself for believing that what they had shared was real. Of course a man like Alexander Sterling wouldn't stay in a place like Millbrook. Of course he wouldn't choose her over his billions of dollars and his glamorous lifestyle. She had been nothing more than an amusing distraction during his recovery. That evening, as she sat alone in her cottage, Toby was at a friend's house. Zara allowed herself to really look at the watch Alexander had left her. In the lamplight, the diamonds caught the glow and threw tiny rainbows on the walls. It was beautiful and valuable and completely foreign to everything in her simple life. She thought about what she could do with the money it would bring. Pay off her debts. Fix the roof that leaked every winter. Maybe even save enough to send Toby to college. It would solve so many of her problems. But every time she looked at it, she saw Alexander's face as he pressed it into her hands. Heard his voice calling it a promise. A promise he had already broken by appearing in photographs with other women. On impulse, she went to her small desk and pulled out a piece of paper. If Alexander Sterling thought he could buy her silence or her forgiveness with expensive gifts, he was wrong. "Mr. Sterling," she wrote, "I am returning your watch. I don't want your money or your promises. What happened between us is over. Please don't contact me again. Zara Johnson." She wrapped the watch carefully in tissue paper, placed it in a small box, and addressed it to Sterling Industries in the city. Tomorrow she would ask Tom Miller to mail it for her when he went to town for supplies. As she sealed the package, she felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Returning the watch felt like closing a door on the most painful chapter of her life. Alexander Sterling could go back to his charity galas and socialite girlfriends. She would go back to her simple life in Millbrook. But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of her village settling down for the night, Zara couldn't stop the tears that finally came. She cried for the man she had thought she knew, for the love she had believed was real, and for the naive girl who had thought fairy tales could come true. In the morning she would be strong again. She would rebuild her walls and protect her heart and never again make the mistake of believing that someone like her could matter to someone like him. But tonight, she let herself grieve for what might have been. Alexander Sterling sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor, staring out at the city skyline without really seeing it. 3 days had passed since Marcus had dragged him back to his old life, and everything felt wrong. The expensive suit felt like a costume, the meetings felt meaningless, and the constant buzz of his phone made him want to throw it out the window. Alexander? Marcus appeared in his doorway looking concerned. The Harrison merger documents are ready for your review. Right? Alexander turned back to his desk, where contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars waited for his signature. A month ago, this deal would have consumed his attention completely. Now he could barely focus on the words. Are you all right? Marcus asked, closing the door behind him and taking a seat across from the massive mahogany desk. You've seemed distracted since you got back. Distracted. That was one way to put it. What Alexander felt was more like he was slowly suffocating, trapped in a life that no longer fit him. I'm fine, he lied, picking up his gold pen, not the same one Zara had returned to him, but one of a dozen identical instruments that lived in his desk drawer. Just readjusting. About that. Marcus leaned forward. The board is asking questions about where you were for 3 weeks. The helicopter crash story only goes so far. They want to know why you didn't contact anyone once you recovered. Alexander had been dreading this conversation. How could he explain that he had chosen to stay hidden? That he had found something in that small village that he had never found in his billion-dollar empire? I had amnesia, he said carefully. Head injury from the crash. I didn't remember who I was until you showed up. It was partially true at least. He had forgotten who he was, not in the medical sense but in every way that mattered. In Millbrook he hadn't been Alexander Sterling, heir to a fortune and slave to corporate expectations. He had just been Alex, a man who found joy in simple things like fixing drainage systems and helping neighbors. The doctors want to run some tests, Marcus continued. Make sure there's no lasting damage. That's not necessary. Alexander, you disappeared for 3 weeks. You missed board meetings, crucial negotiations, appointments with heads of state. And now you're telling me you can't remember any of it? Marcus's voice held a note of skepticism. People are starting to wonder if you're fit to run this company. The threat was subtle but clear. If Alexander didn't convince everyone that he was back to his old self, his position could be in jeopardy. Sterling Industries had shareholders and board members who wouldn't hesitate to push him out if they thought he was unstable. I understand, Alexander said quietly. I'll do whatever's necessary to maintain confidence in my leadership. That evening, Alexander attended the charity gala that had been on his calendar for months. He put on his tuxedo, smiled for the cameras and made small talk with the city's elite. Victoria Ashford, whom he had known since childhood, stayed close to his side, playing the role of concerned friend and potential romantic interest that the society pages loved to speculate about. You look tired, she murmured as they posed for photographs. Are you sure you're ready to be back in public? I'm fine, he said automatically, the same lie he had been telling everyone. But he wasn't fine. As he stood in the ballroom surrounded by hundreds of people in designer clothes, sipping champagne that cost more per bottle than most people made in a week, all he could think about was Zara. Was she asleep in her small cottage? Was she thinking about him at all, or had she already moved on? The thought that she might hate him now was almost unbearable. Alexander Sterling. A booming voice interrupted his brooding. Richard Ashford, Victoria's father and one of the city's most powerful real estate developers, approached with his usual aggressive smile. Good to see you back among the living, son. We were all worried sick. Thank you, Richard. I appreciate your concern. Now, about that waterfront project we discussed before your little adventure. Richard launched into a detailed pitch about a development deal, and Alexander forced himself to listen and respond appropriately. This was his world, deals and mergers and profit margins. He should be grateful to be back. So why did he feel like he was dying inside? The answer came the next morning when his assistant brought him his mail. Among the usual stack of contracts and reports was a small package with familiar handwriting on the label. His heart stopped when he saw the return address, Zara Johnson, Millbrook. With trembling hands he opened the package and found his watch nestled in tissue paper, along with a brief note written in Zara's careful script. Mr. Sterling, the note began, and the formal address hit him like a slap. I am returning your watch. I don't want your money or your promises. What happened between us is over. Please don't contact me again. Zara Johnson. Alexander stared at the note until the words blurred. She had seen the newspaper articles. She knew who he really was now and she wanted nothing to do with him. He couldn't blame her. From her perspective, he had lied to her for weeks, then abandoned her without explanation. But what she didn't understand was that he hadn't abandoned her by choice. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to go back to Millbrook, to fight for what they had together. The only thing stopping him was the knowledge that she deserved better than the complicated, demanding life that came with being involved with someone like him. "Sir?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your 10 o'clock appointment is here." Alexander carefully folded Zara's note and slipped it into his jacket pocket, next to his heart. The watch went into his desk drawer, though he couldn't bring himself to put it back on. It felt tainted now, a symbol of everything that stood between them. As the days passed, Alexander threw himself into work with a ferocity that surprised even Marcus. He negotiated deals, attended meetings, and made decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of dollars. But at night, alone in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city, he read Zara's note over and over until he had memorized every word. He had his assistant research property values in Millbrook, telling himself he was just curious about the local real estate market. He found himself checking the weather reports for the area, wondering if Zara's garden was getting enough rain. He even started following the social media accounts of several Millbrook residents, hungry for any glimpse of the life he had left behind. It was pathetic and he knew it. He was a billionaire with unlimited resources and global influence, reduced to stalking his ex-girlfriend's neighbors on Instagram. But he couldn't help himself. Millbrook had become his obsession, and Zara was at the center of it all. 2 weeks after receiving her note, Alexander made a decision that surprised even him. He called his pilot and had his jet prepared for departure. "Where are we going, sir?" the pilot asked. Alexander looked out at the city he had never really loved, then at the photograph he kept on his desk. A candid shot someone had taken at the village fair showing him and Zara dancing under the stars. In the picture they both looked impossibly happy, lost in their own world. Maybe she would never forgive him. Maybe she would slam the door in his face and tell him to get out of her life forever. But he had to try. He had to tell her the truth about why he had lied, and more importantly, he had to tell her that leaving her had been the biggest mistake of his life. "Millbrook," he told the pilot. "We're going to Millbrook." As the jet lifted off into the cloudy sky, Alexander pressed his face to the window and watched his old life fall away below him. He didn't know what he would find when he reached the small village that had captured his heart. But for the first time since Marcus had dragged him away, he felt like he could breathe again. He was going home. The storm hit Millbrook without warning on a Tuesday evening in late October. One moment the sky was overcast but calm, and the next the wind was howling like a living thing and rain was falling in sheets so thick you couldn't see across the street. Zara was in her kitchen preparing dinner when the power went out. She had been expecting it. The old electrical lines in Millbrook couldn't handle much of a storm, but the sudden darkness still made her jump. Through the window she could see trees bending at dangerous angles and debris flying through the air. "Toby," she called to her brother, who was doing homework in the next room. "Get the flashlights and candles. This is going to be a bad one." As if to prove her point, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the house, followed immediately by the sound of something large crashing in the distance. Probably a tree, maybe onto someone's roof. In a village like Millbrook, everyone would have to help with cleanup once the storm passed. The emergency radio crackled to life with a weather alert. Severe thunderstorm warning remains in effect for the county until midnight. Residents should seek shelter immediately and avoid unnecessary travel. Wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour and flash flooding are possible. Flash flooding. The word sent a chill through Zara that had nothing to do with the weather. It had been exactly 2 months since the last flood, when she had pulled a drowning stranger from the raging creek. 2 months since Alexander Sterling had entered and then abandoned her life. She tried not to think about him anymore, but nights like this made it impossible. Storm sounds reminded her of that first terrifying rescue, which led to memories of nursing him back to health, which led to thoughts of everything that had happened between them. "Zara, come look at this." Toby called from the living room window. She joined him and gasped at what she saw. The creek, swollen by the sudden downpour, was already spilling over its banks. Water was rushing down Main Street like a river, carrying lawn furniture and trash cans in its current. "We need to check on Mrs. Patterson," Zara said, grabbing her raincoat. "Her house is closest to the creek. You can't go out in this." Toby protested. "It's too dangerous." But Zara was already pulling on her boots. "Mrs. Patterson is 83 years old and lives alone. I'm not leaving her to face this by herself." The wind nearly knocked her over the moment she stepped outside. Rain lashed her face like tiny needles, and the sound of rushing water was everywhere. She could barely see the path to Mrs. Patterson's cottage, but she knew the way by heart. Halfway there, she heard a sound that made her blood freeze, a car engine struggling and sputtering somewhere in the darkness. Someone was trying to drive through the flood, which was suicide in conditions like this. Following the sound, she made her way toward the main road and saw headlights wavering through the storm. A sleek black car was stuck in the rising water, its engine dying as the flood reached the exhaust pipe. Through the windshield, she could make out a figure frantically trying to restart the vehicle. Without thinking, Zara waded into the knee-deep water. The current was strong but not yet dangerous, though it was rising fast. She reached the car and pounded on the driver's window. "You have to get out," she shouted over the storm. "The water's rising too fast." The window rolled down and Zara's heart stopped. It was Alexander. For a moment, they just stared at each other through the rain and darkness. He looked exactly as she remembered, those storm-gray eyes, the strong jaw, the dark hair now plastered to his forehead by the rain. But there was something different about his expression, something desperate and urgent that went beyond concern for his current predicament. "Zara," he breathed, and her name on his lips nearly undid her. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, though part of her already knew. The storm, the flood, the dangerous drive through rising water, he had come back during the worst possible conditions. "I had to see you," he said simply. "I know you don't want to see me, I know you told me not to contact you, but I couldn't stay away." A surge of water rocked the car, reminding them both of their immediate danger. Personal issues would have to wait. "We need to get to higher ground," Zara said. "Now." Alexander grabbed what looked like a briefcase from the passenger seat and climbed out of the car. The water was now mid-thigh deep and rising quickly. Together, they struggled toward the village center, fighting against the current with every step. "This way," Zara shouted, guiding him toward the community center, which sat on the highest ground in Millbrook. Other villagers were already gathering there, families with children and elderly residents who had been evacuated from their homes. Inside the old building, lit by emergency lanterns and battery-powered lights, chaos reigned. Mrs. Chun was organizing supplies while Tom Miller tried to account for all the residents. Children huddled with their parents, and everyone spoke in the hushed, urgent tones that emergency situations brought out. "Zara?" Mrs. Patterson hurried over, looking relieved. "Thank goodness you're safe. Toby said you went out to check on me, but my neighbor had already helped me evacuate." "I'm glad you're okay," Zara said, then became aware that every eye in the room had turned to stare at Alexander. In his expensive clothes and with his city pallor, he stood out like a beacon among the working-class villagers. "Well," said Eleanor Wright slowly, "look who decided to come back." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. These people had watched Zara struggle after Alexander's departure. They had seen her heart break even though she had tried to hide it. They were not inclined to welcome him with open arms. "Is that the fellow who was here before?" old Mr. Rodriguez asked loudly. "The one who said he couldn't remember his name?" "Alexander Sterling," Tom Miller said grimly. "Billionaire businessman. We saw the newspaper articles." Alexander winced but didn't try to defend himself. He stood quietly, accepting their judgment, and something about his acceptance made Zara's heart twist painfully. "What do you want?" she asked him quietly, stepping aside from the group. "To talk to you," he said. "To explain. Now. In the middle of a flood. I know the timing is terrible, but when I heard about the storm on the news, all I could think about was you. About what happened the last time there was a flood like this." His eyes were intense, almost pleading. "I was terrified something might happen to you." Before Zara could respond, Tom Miller called for everyone's attention. "Folks, we've got a problem," he announced grimly. "The water's still rising and it's starting to undermine the foundation of the old bridge. If it goes, it'll take out the power lines and cut off the main road out of town." A murmur of concern rippled through the crowd. The bridge was old and had been scheduled for replacement for years, but the village couldn't afford the cost. If it collapsed, Millbrook would be completely isolated until the water receded. "What can we do?" asked Sarah Miller. Tom shook his head helplessly. "Nothing really. We just have to hope it holds." "Actually," Alexander said quietly, "there might be something we can do." All eyes turned to him again, most of them skeptical. "The bridge's main weakness is the eastern support pillar," he continued. "If we could shore it up with some kind of bracing, it might hold long enough for the flood to recede." "And how exactly would you know that?" Tom asked suspiciously. Alexander hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Because Sterling Industries owns the engineering firm that inspected that bridge last year. I've seen the reports. The admission hung in the air like a challenge. Here was proof of exactly how different his world was from theirs. He had access to engineering reports about their bridge while they didn't even know such reports existed. "Do you have those reports with you?" asked Mrs. Chin practically. Alexander looked down at the briefcase he had grabbed from his car. "As a matter of fact, I do. Along with some other documents I thought you might want to see." "What kind of documents?" Zara asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Instead of answering, Alexander opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Plans for Millbrook's infrastructure improvements. New water management systems, bridge replacement, road repairs, upgrades to the electrical grid." He looked directly at Zara. "I've been working on this for weeks. Sterling Industries wants to fund the entire project." Stunned silence greeted this announcement. "Why?" Tom Miller asked suspiciously. "What do you get out of it?" Alexander's eyes never left Zara's face. "The chance to make amends for the mistakes I've made. The chance to give something back to the community that gave me so much." "You mean the community you lied to for weeks?" Eleanor Wright said sharply. "Yes," Alexander said simply. "That's exactly what I mean." Another surge of water against the building reminded them all that they had more immediate concerns than Alexander's motives. Outside, the storm showed no signs of letting up, and the sound of rushing water was getting louder. "Right now, we need to focus on survival," Zara said firmly. "Personal issues can wait until we're all safe." Alexander nodded and turned back to Tom Miller. "The bridge reinforcement would require steel beams and concrete, but if we can improvise with heavy timbers and sandbags, we might be able to buy some time." "That's a suicide mission," Tom said. "Working in that flood, in the dark, with the current running that strong?" "Maybe," Alexander agreed. "But it's better than sitting here waiting for the bridge to collapse." He looked around the room at the worried faces of the villagers, people who had become important to him during his weeks in Millbrook, though they had no reason to trust him now. "I'll do it," he said quietly. "It's my fault the reports weren't shared with you before. Let me try to fix this." "You're not going alone," Zara heard herself say, though the words surprised her as much as anyone else. "Zara, no," Alexander said immediately. "It's too dangerous." "This is my community," she replied firmly. "My neighbors, my friends. If there's a chance to save that bridge, I'm taking it." "And us too," added Tom Miller, looking grim but determined. "If we're doing this, we do it together." As the volunteers gathered their supplies and prepared to venture back into the storm, Zara found herself standing next to Alexander. Despite everything that had happened between them, despite the lies and the heartbreak, they were about to risk their lives together to save their community. "Zara," Alexander said quietly, "whatever happens out there, I need you to know something." "What?" "Leaving you was the worst mistake of my life. And if we survive this night, I'm going to spend however long it takes proving that to you." Before she could respond, Tom Miller was calling for them to move out. But as they headed into the storm together, Zara felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 months: hope. Maybe, just maybe, Alexander Sterling had finally come home. The work at the bridge was brutal and terrifying. The water was chest-deep in places, the current strong enough to knock a person over, and the rain continued to fall in torrents that made it nearly impossible to see. But somehow, working together in the darkness, the small group of volunteers managed to position heavy timbers against the weakening support pillar and pile sandbags around the base. Alexander worked alongside the other men as if he had been doing manual labor his entire life. His expensive clothes were ruined within minutes, but he didn't seem to care. Zara watched him struggle with a particularly heavy beam, his face set with determination, and felt her heart clench with emotion she had been trying to suppress for weeks. "That's the best we can do," Tom Miller finally called out, his voice hoarse from shouting over the storm. "Let's get back before this gets any worse." The journey back to the community center was harrowing. The water had risen another foot, and twice Zara felt herself being swept off her feet, only to be caught by Alexander's strong hands and pulled back to safety. When they finally made it inside, soaked and exhausted, the other villagers greeted them with cheers and blankets and hot coffee from thermos bottles. The makeshift repairs seemed to be holding, for now. "You did good out there," Tom Miller told Alexander quietly. "All of you." Alexander nodded his thanks, but his attention was focused on Zara, who was shivering despite the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "You're freezing," he said, moving closer to her. "I'm fine," she replied automatically, but she didn't move away when he sat down beside her on one of the folding chairs that served as emergency seating. For the next several hours they waited out the storm together. The wind gradually died down, the rain slowed to a steady patter, and the sound of rushing water began to subside. By dawn, the immediate danger had passed. As the first gray light filtered through the windows, people began venturing outside to assess the damage. The village was a mess. Debris everywhere, several trees down, and everything covered in mud and standing water. But the bridge was still standing and everyone was safe. "We're going to need help with cleanup," Mrs. Chin said, surveying the scene. "This is going to take weeks." "Actually," Alexander said, pulling out his phone, "I think I can help with that." For the next hour, Zara watched in amazement as Alexander made a series of phone calls that transformed their disaster recovery effort. Within minutes, he had arranged for emergency generators, professional cleanup crews, and temporary housing for anyone whose home had been damaged. "Helicopters will be here within 2 hours," he reported. "Along with everything else you'll need to get back on your feet." The villagers stared at him with a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. This was what real wealth looked like, the ability to make problems disappear with a few phone calls. "Why are you doing this?" Eleanor Wright asked suspiciously. "What do you really want from us?" Alexander looked at Zara, then back at the assembled villagers. "To be honest, I want your forgiveness. I want the chance to make things right." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I lied to you all. I lied about who I was and why I was here. But what I didn't lie about was how much this place came to mean to me. How much all of you came to mean to me." "Pretty words," said Mr. Rodriguez. "But words are easy when you have billions of dollars to back them up." "You're right," Alexander agreed. "Which is why I'm not just offering words." He opened his briefcase again and pulled out a different set of documents. "These are the incorporation papers for the Millbrook Community Foundation. As of yesterday, it has an endowment of $50 million, specifically earmarked for infrastructure improvements, education, and economic development in this area." Gasps echoed around the room. $50 million was more money than anyone in Millbrook had ever imagined seeing. "The foundation will be managed by a board of trustees elected by the community," Alexander continued. "I'll have no control over how the money is spent. This isn't charity, it's an investment in a place that taught me what really matters in life." "And what's that?" asked Mrs. Chin softly. Alexander's eyes found Zara's across the room. "Community. Connection. Love that isn't based on what you can give someone in return." Zara felt tears prick her eyes. These were the words she had been waiting to hear for 2 months, but she was afraid to believe them. As the morning progressed and the cleanup efforts got underway, Zara found herself working alongside Alexander again. The professional crews he had summoned were efficient and respectful, treating the villagers as partners rather than victims. It was clear that Alexander had chosen them carefully. "You really meant it," she said during a quiet moment as they worked to clear debris from Mrs. Patterson's yard. "About the foundation." "Every word," he replied. "I've had lawyers working on it since the day I left. I knew I had to find a way to give back to this place even if—" He trailed off. "Even if what?" "Even if you never forgave me." They worked in silence for a while, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, as they took a break under the shade of an old oak tree, Zara found the courage to ask the question that had been tormenting her. "Why did you lie to me? If you remembered everything from the beginning, why didn't you just tell me who you were?" Alexander sat down heavily on a fallen log, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion and something deeper. "Because I was terrified," he said simply. "Of what?" "Of you rejecting me. Of you treating me differently once you knew about the money." He looked up at her with those storm-gray eyes that had haunted her dreams. "In my world, people want things from me. Always. Money, connections, favors, opportunities. But you just wanted to help someone who was hurt. You didn't ask for anything in return. So you decided to take that choice away from me," Zara said quietly. "You decided I couldn't handle the truth." "Yes. And I was wrong." He stood up and moved closer to her. "I was wrong about a lot of things. But the wrongest thing I did was thinking I could just disappear from your life and somehow that would be better for you." "It wasn't," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for lying, I'm sorry for leaving, and I'm sorry for making you feel like what we had didn't matter." He reached out tentatively and touched her hand. "Because it did matter. It was the most real thing that's ever happened to me." Zara looked down at their joined hands. His soft from a lifetime of privilege, hers calloused from hard work, but fitting together perfectly despite their differences. "I saw the pictures," she said. "In the newspaper. You with that woman at the charity gala. Victoria." Alexander's grip on her hand tightened. "She's a friend, nothing more. she never has been anything more. The society pages like to speculate, but there's never been anyone serious in my life. He paused. Not until you. Alex. I love you, he said urgently. I know I have no right to say that after everything I've done, but I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you see the good in everyone. I love how you make me want to be better than I am. Tears were streaming down Zara's cheeks now. I love you too, she whispered. I tried so hard not to, but I couldn't stop. Even when I hated you, I still loved you. Alexander cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. Then give me another chance. Let me prove that I'm not the selfish bastard who lied to you and ran away. Let me show you that the man you fell in love with, Alex, is who I really am when I'm with you. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to split my time between the city and here. I'm saying I want to be part of this community, really part of it, not just a visitor playing pretend. He took a shaky breath. I'm saying I want to marry you if you'll have me. Zara's heart stopped. Marry me? I know it's crazy. I know we have a lot to work through. But I can't imagine my life without you in it. He dropped to one knee right there in Mrs. Patterson's muddy yard, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Zara Johnson, will you marry me? The ring was beautiful but simple, a single diamond on a classic gold band, elegant without being ostentatious. It was perfect for her, and the fact that he had chosen something so thoughtful made her heart ache with love. Alexander, she breathed. Alex, he corrected softly. To you I'll always be Alex. Around them, she could hear the sounds of the village coming back to life, people calling to each other, machinery humming, children playing despite the chaos. This was her world, her community, her home. And somehow, impossibly, this man wanted to be part of it. Yes, she said, laughing through her tears. Yes, I'll marry you. Alex slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then stood and kissed her with a passion that made her forget about everything else. The mud, the cleanup, the curious stares of their neighbors who had started to gather around them. When they finally broke apart, the entire community was watching them with smiles and tears and applause. Well, said Mrs. Chin, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, I guess we're going to need to plan a wedding. The biggest wedding Millbrook has ever seen, added Mrs. Patterson. Actually, Alex said, his arm tight around Zara's waist, I was thinking something small. Just family and friends. Here in the village. You sure about that? Tom Miller asked. Man with your money could probably afford Westminster Abbey. Alex looked down at Zara, his eyes soft with love. I'm sure. The only place I want to get married is right here, surrounded by the people who taught me what love really means. 6 months later, on a perfect spring day when the wildflowers were blooming and the creek was babbling peacefully in its banks, Alexander Sterling and Zara Johnson were married in the Millbrook Village Square. The bride wore her grandmother's simple white dress, and the groom wore a suit from the local men's shop. Mrs. Chen made the cake, Tom Miller served as best man, and Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears through the entire ceremony. It wasn't the society wedding the newspapers had been expecting. There were no celebrity guests or designer gowns or million-dollar floral arrangements. Just two people who had found true love in the most unexpected place, surrounded by a community that had learned to see past appearances to the heart underneath. As they danced their first dance to music played by the same local band that had performed at the Harvest Fair, Alex whispered in Zara's ear, "Any regrets?" She looked around at their friends and neighbors, at the simple decorations and homemade food, at the man she loved more than life itself. Then she smiled the smile that had captured his heart from the very beginning. Not a single one, she said. This is perfect. And it was. Because sometimes if you're very lucky, love really can conquer all.